All right, welcome everyone.
Does it?
How are you doing?
Yeah, can't complain. Never like listening to myself, but that's that's how
It's
it
a treat
goes.
you get once a week now.
Yeah. Listen, it's not the funnest thing listening to yourself.
Welcome to all our online guys watching now. We've got people on Facebook and YouTube. Just a reminder, as always, please send in your comments or your questions to us. We'd love to hear them. We'd love to send them to our panel. We've also got Brent again. Brent, again, well done. Great sermon today. And we've also got Johan, who's joining us, one of our community and a part of SARD Investment Holdings. So he's got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to investment. So Johan, also great to have you here.
Okay.
Just maybe to start off, Brent, I think firstly, I think there was a little bit of a negative reaction when you started your sermon because we realized you had shaved off your goatee. So there was a little bit of pushback on social media, but I think by the end of a great sermon, you got back into the black. I think every week, we said it's been quite a heavy, obviously, time. We're finishing off Ecclesiastes now. It's not a light book of the Bible. It's not, but it's been important. I think it's been helpful to people. Obviously, every week you've got to engage with that text. This week was Ecclesiastes 11. Maybe just run us through that process. You've got to engage with it and then try work out how it's going to be applicable to the people you're preaching for. Maybe just run us through how this week's been for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult kind of thing to explain the rhythm, I guess, of doing these things. I mean, somebody once, I think it may have been a British preacher from years ago called Spurgeon, who said, preachers should have a Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And I think that's how one's got to kind of approach these things. You're reading a book that's written in an ancient context, but I think if we're honest, nothing's really changed with being human. The kind of stuff Solomon is looking at, it doesn't take too much wisdom, to sit in that position and look at the world in which we live and to kind of go, well, that's the rhythm, that we see in people. And so it hasn't been really hard for me to kind of make the link between what Solomon's talking about and what people are experiencing. And I think especially, what Solomon misses out on, I think, again, I've mentioned this every week, sort of, he disconnects from God towards the end of his life. He kind of marries a whole bunch of women who've come from other nations. A lot of the marriage in those days was sort of economically based. And so he disconnects from God. And so he looks at the world, I think, like probably the majority of people in our valley look at the world. Kind of, you look at it quite objectively from a human flesh perspective rather than from some spiritual perspective. And so I think like this week is just kind of saying, hey, like investment language, we really understand. Well, I think we understand it in principle, let's be honest. With the practice, well, the stats show us not. But it's how to think beyond simply, hey, making money for me. The gospel has always been about the other and about God's kingdom. And so, those are the kind of ways I tend to approach these things.
Yeah, and just looking at some of the stats are quite shocking or quite surprising. We're really good at spending. We're really bad at saving. Why do you think that is?
So, I mean, as I said in the sermon, I didn't want to get too deep into it, but I think it's a heart issue. I think there's a cultural thing. I mean, I've often reflected on it that, maybe it's because we don't have public transport. I don't know, but in a lot of overseas countries, you don't even need a car, and if you do buy a car, you tend to buy small and simple. We tend to spend a massive proportion of our salaries on cars, and so I think there's a cultural idolatry, perhaps, of success. I think it kind of gives us a sense of status and a sense of meaning and importance amongst our community, and that kind of just gets ingrained into the culture. You watch your granddad do it, your dad learns it from him, you learn it from your dad, you'll pass it on to your kids. And I think the gospel calls us to kind of break that thing. And I've really enjoyed the simplicity of the season personally. I barely go to the shops. I've probably dropped my household expenditure by, 60% probably. I've been living out of my freezer and what's in my cupboards, the stuff that's going to eventually expire in any case. And I've loved the simplicity and just, I think, the realization that I don't need the stuff, that actually, while shopping gives you that quick it gives you a quick little blip on the serotonin levels. Long term, it just can't satisfy. And I think there's a sense where I think when we do the things God calls us to do, we'll see how meaningful those are and how actually empty, the vapor that Solomon talks about, it's just grabbing after candle smoke. That's what money and stuff is. Because you know how it goes, man. We all do it. You buy, you save up for that, whatever it is, and you buy it, and you're like, this is the bee's knees. And like a week later, you're like, meh, it's like whatever. It's not quite as exciting as
in the garage. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and maybe just to bring you in here, I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to investment, but you've also got a real heart for the gospel and for the kingdom, and you've been able to bring those two together in many ways. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what you do, and also how you've merged the investment and also Jesus' kingdom.
Great. Well, thanks. It's great to be with you guys, and great sermon as well. It's so relevant. It's so applicable. I think it's a lot of us are going through reevaluating many of these things, which is fantastic. If that's one benefit we get, I think it's brilliant. So yeah, I think we all want to try and use what's in our hands for the kingdom. Whatever you have in your hands, whether it's a talent or an opportunity or funds or skills or whatever, we want to use it to expand the kingdom, right? And I think in my little space, also realize that people that control and deploy funds have a lot of influence. I mean, Ramaphosa would speak to the CEOs of the banks before he announces something. The Ruperts and the Oppenheimers have an ability to make a difference during COVID. And I just think that, big companies like Sasol, they would consult their key shareholders before they make a strategic decision. So ideally, we want to be in that position as Christians where we also can exert the influence that goes with investing, and not only bring the financial solutions, but also the biblical solutions. So our starting point was really just to say, what would this look like in common sense day-to-day living? And we decided to put up a fund from which we will invest, and then to do two things. One is to unashamedly push the biblical values and Christian ethos as part of our investment. So we declare it up front. We say, well, here's the money we would like to invest, but you should know that it comes with an agenda. We have a biblical worldview, and if we're going to sit on your board, we're going to impose that on the company. So you shouldn't take the money if you're not open to that. And some take it reluctantly, and others take it quite eagerly. But you've got the whole spectrum. But it's a lot of fun. And then secondly, what we do from the fund is we say, well, the profits then also don't belong to us. So there's no private shareholding. It's structured in a charity. So we can, at the end of the day, use the profits to fund ministries. So like a company would have a dividend policy, we at the end of the year decide, okay, X% of the profits go to ministries. And we just pay that as a dividend, if you want, out to ministry. So we just made some of the, I would say, theoretical principles a bit more practical in giving it a structure and giving it a form to do it in. And I must say the amount of that comes from that is just exhilarating. We give significantly more away now in a year than we pay on salaries for our staff. And, that is just great. Just that is it's just a phenomenal kick for everyone that's involved there.
That's huge. That's so brilliant to hear and so exciting. Maybe just some practical advice, guys, of aware of it, or if they listen to the sermon, maybe they felt challenged. What would be waking up Monday morning, a step that they can take to think maybe more kingdom-mindedly?
I think Brent has touched on a lot of those today. We need to go. What a crisis does, like COVID, is it takes us back to basics, in everything that you do. And then in financial matters as well, it takes us back to basics. So I think one of the things I would encourage people to do now in COVID is to write down the things that you wish you did do in the 5 years before COVID. I did that in the 2009-10 credit crisis, and I'm so glad I did, because this is not the last crisis that we're going to face. And if you don't write down those lessons and make them, part of your life, then, the next crisis, you may have the same challenges. The basics of money is that you're the steward and not the owner, and to really, you're just visiting this planet, right? And then it's a short-term visit, and you should make it count. And so I think that is the overriding principle. I like the principle of tithing personally. I don't think it's a be-all and end-all, but I think it's an incredible start. If you want to get fit, there's some basic things you need to do. It doesn't guarantee that you will get fit, but at least if you decide I'm going to exercise twice a week, it's a start. Tithing is a start. You need to start somewhere. I think that's a great place. We should get rid of debt. Debt is not only a biblical principle, it's also a great investment. If you're paying 10 or 12% on your overdue credit card or store card, that's a guaranteed 10 or 12% return that you can get by paying it off. You show me an investment that can give you a guaranteed return like that. And, so I think, and then if we're blessed to have something left over, we should invest. And let me just distinguish between discretionary investment, which is you decide, and compulsory investment, which is really what you should be doing, as Brent has said, for your retirement. Now that's way more structured. It's in a retirement fund. You may have less influence, but you should talk to your financial advisor about the underlying. You should tell him that I don't want to invest in alcohol or in gambling or in companies that advance loans to people and put them into slavery. So please don't invest my retirement fund in that.
Sure.
Talk to your financial advisor about it. It's basic, but it's important. Hopefully one day in South Africa, that's one of my dreams, we'll have the equivalent of what the Muslim community has established, their own bank, Al Baraka Bank, or their own asset manager, Oasis. So I think we don't have that yet, but I think these are some basic principles.
Huge, very helpful. Brent, maybe just to bring you back in, we've spoken a little bit about, I think we've alluded to what good could come out of a bad time. We've got these stats which aren't great, but we've got this gospel that's powerful and life-changing. And what are you hoping to see people, how people can change during this time, and specifically when it comes to our finances and our investing?
Sure. I just want to add to what Johan said. I think a crisis is, if you think of somebody who's unhealthy, the guy gets a heart attack, survives it, and everything in his life changes from that point onwards. He just realizes he can't go down that road. And my hope is that something of what the season does is exactly that. And I think, it's very difficult to shift your worldview or to shift your culture when things are going well. It's almost sometimes God's got to get us, the old story is, God gets you on your knees. And that's what changes you, because you literally have everything slowly pulled away. And so I think the season is already showing us that we can, there's a lot we want, but not a lot that we actually need, or a lot less that we need than what I think we need. And I think it's a great opportunity to actually take stock and go, what, we don't actually need all of these things. Yes, they're nice to have, and if we can have them, why not? But I'm really hopeful that I think this, the season, it's just too easy, I think, in the season to keep going and pretend, or, previous to the season, to keep going and pretend like it's all okay. Somebody on the forums has just raised, you've got used to a lifestyle that was only possible due to gross inequality, they wrote. And I think this suddenly, brings it into very sharp relief. All of a sudden, you're listening to your domestic worker who generally is okay, but suddenly is not okay. Or that low-income employee who was making ends meet, but has now suddenly lost his job. And I think it's going to give us an opportunity to really, show gospel generosity, because the need is going to be huge, and it's going to be on our doorstep. And I think it's just a phenomenal opportunity for us to sort of, we don't think about our money in this way. I'm reading a book at the moment, Sean, the author's name I can't even pronounce, but it's called Scarcity. And it's a really interesting kind of book. And he talks about these sort of trade-off costs. Everything you buy or everything you do with your money is a trade-off. So, if I spend $50 on a couple of coffees a week, that's 50 Rand I can't spend on anything else or on something else. And I think that in the season, it would seem to me that we're going to get to a point where it's going to be like, I can have some of the nice stuff, or I could give somebody a job. And I think that's just going to become a phenomenal opportunity. And I'm convinced that I think if we're praying and reading scripture and listening to the voice of God in this, it will be very difficult for us to kind of go, hey, you know, as soon as the airlines open up, I'm going to do my overseas holiday. When I know there's 3 families who I could actually, you know, give an education to or keep in a home. I'm not even sure that if we're listening to God, that decision is going to be all that difficult. And so I guess I'm hoping there's a sharpening in us to the voice of the Spirit. Again, I can't remember where the quote comes from. There's an old quote that God sort of whispers in the good times, but screams at us in the difficulties. And I just suspect this is one of those seasons where God is amplifying his voice.
Sure.
Which is exciting for me. We're deaf half the time.
Yeah. Just a reminder to the guys on Facebook and YouTube, please send in any questions, comments. Also, I think prayer requests. We really want to pray for you guys. Even if we don't get a chance online here, we do have a prayer team that's really fielding those. So please, we know it's a tough time for a lot of people. So please send any prayer requests as well. Johan, I was chatting to a guy in the week, and he was saying, sort of talking about the dynamic in relationship as well. So his example was maybe there's a married couple where they both agree on, let's say, family is important, but the guy will maybe be thinking, I'm going to earn money to make sure that our family's sorted, and his wife would be thinking, money is important, but relations are really important. So they've almost got the same goal in what they're investing in, but they've got a really different way of doing it. I just maybe thought get your input on that as a family guy, that dynamic, and maybe how to navigate something of that in the home, and maybe especially now with COVID.
I think in everything in life, it's so important to take it through to the practical implications and have the discussion at that level. Even at a company strategic level, we often see that, right? So I talk about a chair and you talk about a chair, but I have a bar stool in my mind and you have a lazy boy in your mind, but we happily talk for hours, and yet we're on totally different places. So it's important to have case studies. It's important to have application exercises. So how are we going to do this? What does it mean? What does saving for retirement mean? Or what does this mean? Or generosity mean for us? What is our family definition of that? So that ultimately, because it will affect everybody. If Linky and I decide to live in this way and give away that much, or whatever the case may be, it has implications for the type of lifestyle that the children will have. So it's not just an individual's decision and with repercussions for an individual. So I do think that is critically important. The communication and the bandwidth thereof, that's something that we have a lot of communication, but often not a lot of bandwidth on that. And we really need to press in on many of these issues. So for us, it's helped, and we've done well in certain years and not so good in other years. But whenever we've had a rhythm of a family meeting once a week, a Sunday evening family meeting, these things tend to come up, and then whether it's at a frivolous level, like I remember we going on holiday once and we said, okay, so what do you want to get out of the holiday? And the one may say, I don't want anyone to eat chips in the car. I said, okay, that's good. Let's put it on the list. So it's very practical, but it's very important, and we should have that on all topics in the family. I think discuss it through.
Sure.
Johan, do you think the season is going to force us to have some discussions that we haven't had to have in a long time?
I think for sure. I hope so. If we don't, we've lost out, because we had the discussion at our dinner table the other night, and we said, look, it's all good and well to realize that, there's this inequality. But ultimately, I need to land this thing very personally and say, what am I and us as a family going to do about this? And there's a certain component of, you know, the word radical tends to come up, where you feel, gee, I don't know whether I want to do that, because deep inside of us, I think, especially in a community like ours, what we really want, if we're honest, is we want the status quo afterwards. So we're willing to do a lot of things in order to ensure that we can go back to the status quo. And that is what caused many of the problems. So we can't go back there, or if we do, it will be a circle and we'll just end here again. But what does that mean? If I can't go on with the status quo in my family or in the way that we spend money, what does that mean? And I just want to touch on one other thing you said, Brent, is that, I mean, we get caught up in that relative benchmark. So relative to others, we may feel that we're doing well, or relative to, but if you have the wrong benchmark, everything is easy, right? If my benchmark is to do more push-ups than my grandmother, you know, that will work. It's easy, but it's not going to change my life, you know. So I think we just need to be, we need to have the absolute biblically inspired benchmarks when it comes to generosity and to what I can ultimately decide to keep for myself, not what I can give away. It's never yours to begin with. So you really need to decide what you're going to keep for yourself.
Because my benchmark is a 14-year-old machine, so I've got to push hard, you know. But actually, I mean, in all seriousness, I listened to a critique of some of the sort of prosperity teaching, you know, which kind of says that, you know, God wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and happy. And the person making the critique, I think, was exactly right on it. And I think it's about that benchmark, Johan. And so he was kind of saying, if the benchmark is Christ, you know, he was a guy who never owned a home. I mean, he says, you know, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He was, you know, he was a blue collar worker, not particularly wealthy or well thought of. You know, he was the village builder. That was his job. He was an artisan. You know, didn't have all the sway and influence, didn't have all the trappings, didn't come as a king or any of those things. And I think there's a very serious question, Johan. I think you're 100% on it as to what are we benchmarking ourselves against? Because I think we benchmark against our neighbors or against the colleague or against, you know, some, you know, famous person who we aspire to. And actually the benchmark is really Christ. And we're so far, I mean, this is just, and I say this with not being judgmental, because it's true. It's as true for me as it is for the three, you know, the other two of you online with me. I think we're closer to the wealthy people of the world than we are to the humility of how Christ came into this world. And there's a very serious question. And I think the season, Sean, to go back to your earlier question, I think the season is a good time to force us to have some discussions. You know, for some families, they have to. It's just like the income's not there. So it's like, hey guys, we can't do the overseas holiday or the whatever it is, and, you know, whatever the degree of that freedom we had is not there. So we have to downscale. This is what the new thing looks like. I just think there's an opportunity to do that, not because we have to, but because we want to. You know, where you can realize the futility, I think, of some of that thinking of, you know, trying to keep up with the neighbor and, you know, he got a new car last year, I've got to get a better one this year. And I mean, it sounds so crude when I say it, but I think it's true. I think that's how we think. And we're all, listen, none of us is immune to it, man.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Maybe just on that, what would be helpful? I was thinking back, it was probably about a year ago when we did the viral series. And that was the first time I really heard Johan speak and some of the other guys about sort of business, but linking in the gospel, linking in the kingdom. And out of that, we got a lot of our connect groups. So we've got at the church, we've got life groups and connect groups, but basically smaller groups of people that are close to you, that you really do life together with and pray for. Maybe I'll just throw it out to both of you guys. In your lives, how important have those, you've had a small group of people that really have influence on you, that you listen to, that can challenge you, that can encourage you. How important has that been? And then again, always the caveat of how's that changed, better or worse, in lockdown?
Sure. Well, I think all the groups are struggling in lockdown. So let me just say that out. I think you know, people are Zooming all day, and then, you know, in the evenings, the thought of putting, you know, my face in front of another square screen for another hour and a half. I think a lot of guys are struggling. So I think there's been some complexity in that. You know, strategically, Sean, I think as leaders in the church, where we want to come out in the next season is we really want to put a lot of effort into the connect groups. So just for those listening, our life groups are sort of, mixes of families and genders, 8 to 16 people. Our connect groups are single gendered, 4 or less people. It gives them a huge amount of agility. So, if someone's traveling on business, we can move from a Tuesday morning to a Thursday morning. It's very easy. We're not upsetting all sorts of schedules. But I also, I watched before lockdown, I was part of a group one night, Sean, and it was just phenomenal for me because, particularly when you start talking about money, and I'd be interested to hear Johan talk a bit about this, but, let's say there's a business guy and he's not going well in the business. He doesn't want to come home necessarily and tell his wife it's not going well because he doesn't want to alarm her. And I think there is maybe some sense of, the word I'm going to use is bravado, but it's not quite that negative. We want to help. We want to be the providers. We want to care for our families, and we don't want to make them feel anxious. But I listened to guys have conversations in that group, man, that they would never have had in front of their wives in 100 years. I was listening to one guy and I was like, I'm telling you, your wife doesn't know. I know more about you in this one sentence than what your wife does. And it just created an openness where I think we could be accountable. And, I think even as a pastor of a church, I've really valued people around me. Grant and I spend a lot of time together praying and talking about where we're at personally, because we need to, have that accountability, and we try and be vulnerable in all parts of our lives. And I think I gotta be honest, I think that's harder to do in a life group. I think there's a dynamic there that makes it tougher to do that. And I think without those groups, I think that some of that culture shift I've been talking about, Sean, I don't think that happens easily outside of a group. It's like, we got to go for coffee, and that sermon on Sunday, man, it was interesting. And Johan said that thing, man, that was really challenging. And we kind of, in that place, we debate it out. And I think that's where God does his greatest work, as we work out in community what it means to follow Jesus. And we just need other people, because otherwise we do stick our fingers in our ears and ignore. It's easy to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the accountability aspect of it is great, because if you commit to something, then obviously accountability, from that point on, you have accountability. And if you publicly commit to something, our life group has also struggled a bit during this time. I think it is a bit difficult to keep it at the same level, and with everyone being overwhelmed with all the Zoom meetings, as Brent has said. I do think, just coming from the other angle that Brent referred to, the honest discussion part of it, we're dying for honest discussions, because honest discussion mean I have to get rid of my own pride of, I have to be able to say, well, I'm actually not doing well in this area, or I actually don't understand this, or you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to change, because you're going to get stuff out of that discussion and you need to do something with. And I just think that is so important. Now, with business people, I totally agree with Brent. My experience is that those discussions are typically one-on-one. I call it a Nicodemus ministry. When Nicodemus came to Jesus in the middle of the night, he was this prominent board member, right? He was giving the answers all the time and saying what people should do, and he has this position as a board member. And so he came to Jesus in the middle of the night, and he said, I don't actually have a clue. That's basically the question. And I find that happens as well in the business environment, that business guys are more likely to come to someone one-on-one with a question in the middle of the night type of thing, well, in a scenario where there's not others around, and then be open to a discussion. I think those of us that are involved in business have a wonderful opportunity to find ourselves in those discussions from time to time, and should make it count.
Thanks,
yeah, absolutely. I think this is, Johan, you've hit the nail on the head here. I think we've tried to be a church, and are growing into that all the time, that is making disciples. And, I think these are exactly the conversations that we need to be having with people. And, I think you alluded to it earlier, as you go in as board members to come in and kind of say, we're going to do this biblically. I think there's such an opportunity for us to go one-on-one with people who are struggling, who are uncertain, and to say, hey, let me, I haven't got all the answers. Here's what I do know, and to steer them in a direction. The opportunity is huge, man. I'm convinced that we really have some unique opportunities in this season.
Maybe just on that, Brent. I mean, I think we were chatting in the week about how we've got a prayer team, we've got a counseling team set up. We haven't heard a lot, from the ground type of thing on needs and requests for counseling and stuff like that. Could be we haven't felt sort of the realities of some of the COVID stuff yet. Could be just the way our community thinks and acts. Maybe just from your pastoral side, you got an encouragement to get people to ask for help if they need.
Yeah, first of all, I think the need is growing. I think because of the nature of our jobs, there's probably a little bit of a buffer. Companies are not going to fall over instantaneously. If you're a little, one-man show, street corner kind of business, 2 weeks in, you're done. Your money's out and it's over. I think the businesses we're in are bigger businesses and they've got a bit more flexibility and resilience. But the reality is it's a growing reality. We're hearing about more and more people that are either having to take salary cuts or have lost jobs. I do think there is maybe a reticence in this community to ask for help. And so, just to put it out there for those listening, we've got a team of skilled professionals who are able to offer counsel and coaching in the season, because sometimes you really need somebody from the outside. You need somebody to pray for you and just to know that you're not alone, but to have somebody who can cast a wise eye on, your finances, just from a different perspective, and to, point out some of the flaws and some of the opportunities, because again, I think there are often opportunities that a tough season just makes us blind to. So that reality is growing, but there's we're fearful to ask for help, Sean. I don't think we do it easily in this valley. I think it's a sign of weakness often for us. I see it myself. I need to move something heavy. Like, I'll find a way to move it without having to phone somebody and ask for help. I'll break my back and may need a trip to the hospital, but I'm not going to ask for help. And so just, for those out there, if you are on the other end of this stream, man, we're here to help you. We don't have all the answers, but we would love to journey with you and see if we can make sense of this season. It's going to be tough. Let's not be naive about it. The economy's taken a big knock, and it'll be with us for a long time.
Sure.
I think it is a marathon. We need to realize that it's a marathon, and we need to realize that we've run about 4K. So, it's not a good time to ask, my legs are feeling good, so, I'm probably going to make it. It's a bit early for that.
Sure.
So I think it's important to understand that it's going to be a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Just some feedback from the online guys. There was a recommendation for a book called Neither Poverty Nor Riches, which is apparently a really good read, which brings the theological side of this as well in. So if you guys are looking for some material, that might be a good place to start. Your book was called, Brent?
Scarcity.
Scarcity, okay.
Yeah, it's not a Christian book, but it just kind of looks at how having little affects our psychology. About a third of the way through the book, so far really interesting. I think it's often sometimes very difficult. Somebody raised the question of the sort of discrepancy between rich and poor, and I think one of the difficulties in the season, I think we mentioned it last week, perhaps it may have been. So, for example, the reality is that suicide rates are skyrocketing, and I think there's a desperation in people. And so it's easy from the outside to look at that and go like, how could you do that? But you're looking at it from a particular perspective where you're not in that situation. And I think when it comes to wealth and poverty, it's very easy for us as wealthy people to say, well, why do people do this or not do that? But it does affect our mindset. And I think that's where this book's been pretty helpful in just, helping understand that having little does change the way that you think about things, and it consumes your energy, and energy that a wealthy person could put into being creative, the poor person's putting into simply surviving day by day. So it's a helpful little book, really good read.
Sure. Listen, I think we can start wrapping up. Is there anything maybe you guys had in the mind that we haven't covered, hasn't been asked, that you just wanted to share before we do?
Maybe just to say, Sean, that I just listening to it, and we've touched on the word generosity. I think it's important to challenge ourselves on generosity. And coming back to benchmark, I have this one friend, which sometimes you wish you didn't have a friend like that. He's a US guy. He and his family decided that they're basically going to live on a salary, which they said, which isn't a very big salary, but I mean, it's a good salary, but it's, and the rest they give away. I think they give away, well, I know it's in excess of $30 million a year now already. But he has a saying that just challenged me. He says that, you just happen to get a certain talent from God, and it wasn't meant for your own consumption. It was meant for the better of the bigger family. So the analogy that he uses is, he says that just because you are the army chef doesn't mean that you can eat better than the troops. You may have all the tools to make food with, and you may have a lot of inventory, but it wasn't for you. It was to make sure that the troops can eat well. And I found that such a good analogy because our first inclination is to think, well, I have this, or I have that, or I have achieved this. But once you realize that it's all grace, then you also realize that it wasn't meant for you. It was meant for the bigger good. So I think in this time we should be asking, what do I have? And how can I use it for the bigger good and not for my own consumption?
Sure. Man, I don't have a lot to add to that. That's a great illustration. I've got to use that one in a sermon. That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think I think Johan, it goes right back to something you said in the beginning is, maybe the fundamental culture shift in us into, to have a biblical gospel worldview is that it's not your money. That you're a steward of whatever gifts, time, talent, treasure, the whole gamut of what God has given you is by grace and by grace alone. And you're a steward, you're a caretaker of those resources, and you get to enjoy them. That's one of the blessings that Timothy tells us. But it's an enjoyment built on a foundation of generosity initially. And I think it's something we certainly are learning to do as a church. It's been phenomenal to see the generosity around the food parcels. We've raised massive amount of money. The elders have given from Protea Valley to Renew Trust. We've given $500,000 of our sort of excess finances that we were sort of saving for a rainy day. This is a rainy day. For the next 3 months, we're going to, put food in families' mouths, and 300, families' mouths. It's phenomenal. And I'm really been excited to see the kind of growing generosity in us. So it's been a good season, man.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Brent and Johan. Thanks, everyone, for the engagement from the online platforms. But thanks to you two gents for your time and your input. I think it's been hugely helpful. Absolutely.
Cool. Let's pray together.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Father, just thank you for people like Johan who help us think a little bit differently. Thanks for even Ecclesiastes, which we see a perspective on the world, but it's a perspective that in some sense misses you. And I think the book is helpful for us, Lord, because it's pushed us to rethink how we look at the world in which we live. And so we even want to say thank you, Lord, for this season, as terrible as it is, and as tough as it's going to be over the next season, and as horrible as it is to hear of people getting ill and dying. We know that it is going to teach us some things, Lord, that are going to fundamentally change this world. And so help us to have ears to hear and hearts to respond positively to what you would be teaching us in this season, Holy Spirit. And so guide us and bless us. We pray especially for those who are listening who are struggling through financial worries, job insecurities. We pray for those who are having to do this whole lockdown thing alone and are feeling deeply isolated. We just pray, Lord, that they would know your presence and would see your power at work. And so we ask your blessing in Jesus' beautiful name. Amen.
Amen.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Have a lekker day. We'll
you too.
sides in the week.
Okay.
Thanks, Jan. Cheers,